Nightingale awakens naked on the shores of Cauldron Lake. As he wanders through the woods, he is chased, captured, and killed by people in deer masks, being tied to a table and having his heart cut out. Meanwhile, FBI duo Saga Anderson and Alex Casey arrive in Bright Falls to investigate a series of murders in the area, performed by a group known as the Cult of the Tree. While investigating Nightingale's murder scene, Saga finds a manuscript page that makes mention of her and Alex. They take Nightingale's body to the morgue where they meet Sheriff Tim Breaker, cousin of Sarah Breaker. He took over as sheriff after Sarah left to join the FBI. While in the morgue looking over the body, they find another manuscript page in his open chest cavity. Sheriff Breaker mentions that he also found similar pages in the area and goes to grab them, but while reading them over, he stops in his tracks, looks up, and vanishes into thin air with the pages. Suddenly, Nightingale stands up from the table and attacks, killing a few deputies before he vanishes amidst Saga's gunfire. Saga and Alex return to Cauldron Lake to hunt for Nightingale, where Saga finds a page detailing a ritual that must be completed to enter an overlap between the real world and the dark place where Nightingale is hiding. She follows the directions on the page, sets up and completes the ritual, and enters the overlap where she hunts Nightingale. While in the overlap, she hears the voice of her daughter, Logan, pleading for help, and hears Nightingale raving about needing to find the clicker, the weapon Alan Wake used to defeat Barbara Jagger 13 years earlier. She also has a vision of Alan himself, and is able to speak with him directly, albeit in bits and pieces like a radio with bad reception. She finds Nightingale, kills him, and appears back on the Cauldron Lake shoreline, where Alan Wake is laying in the sand. He awakens and says they need to stop Mr. Scratch. He's escaped the dark place too. The three of them hop in the car and drive back to Bright Falls, to the hotel to talk. On the drive, Logan calls Saga, panicked. Apparently, she slipped in the shower and almost drowned, but is fine. Reaching the hotel, Alan tries to recount his memories of how he got out of the dark place. Alan wakes up in the dark place in a TV studio green room, about to go on stage for an interview with a Mr. Warlin Dorr. They discuss Alan's latest book, Initiation, but Alan doesn't remember writing it. Afterwards, he attempts to leave the studio, but is attacked and wakes up again in a writer's room in a cabin. He sees pieces of a plot outline for Initiation on the board, and sits down at the typewriter to try changing the story to help him progress. He wakes again inside the green room for the interview, but it's changed. Sam Lake is there, and they discuss the new Alex Casey film. Alan tries to leave again and gets further this time, encountering Ati, the janitor from the oldest house in Control. Ati recognizes him as Tom, and tells him to fetch his tool from the shoebox in the studio basement. Down there, Alan finds a broken lamp, shaped like an angel, with the cord missing. He is able to manipulate the dark place with it and create new pathways for him to travel. He learns this lamp is the very same lamp that the clicker was cut from. Alan finally leaves the studio, emerging in a twisted version of New York City, built from Alan's memories, his Alex Casey books, and whatever the dark place filled in the gaps with. A phone rings and a friendly but unfamiliar voice tells Alan to find the subway. The path to his escape is down there. Alan proceeds to and through the subway station and tunnels, using his lamp and the writing room to change the landscape around him and weave it into a story. Taking inspiration from his Alex Casey books, which were already set in New York, Initiation turns into a story about Alex Casey investigating a murder cult that has been using Alan's books as inspiration for their murders. Finding the cult meeting space deep in the tunnels, Alan writes in a summoning ritual that causes the dark presence to detect him and chase him through the tunnels. Making an escape, Alan finds Nightingale's body on a slab, dead, and has a vision of Saga. The same conversation she had with him, but from the other side, still through a poor connection. Alan then emerges back up to street level, but things have changed, and his old apartment building that he lived in with Alice is now here, Parliament Tower. He enters and rides the elevator up, and as the doors open, several camera flashes aimed directly at the elevator doors go off. Alan then enters the apartment and finds a video diary left by Alice, detailing her memories of the events at Cauldron Lake. Her marriage was struggling. Alan was stuck in a writer's block. She secretly set up this vacation to try and help Alan to write. After revealing this deception to him at the cabin, he stormed out angrily, and as far as she recalls, she never saw him again, assuming he just drowned, while she returned home. For the last 6 years, she's been haunted by an evil monster version of Alan, tormenting her in her apartment at night. She set up the lights and the camera to capture pictures of it, and has begun turning these pieces into an art exhibit called The Dark Place. Alan enters his writing room again, taking our perspective back to the hotel in Bright Falls. Alan explains to Saga and Alex that Mr. Scratch is the name used by the Dark Presence when it is taking the form of Alan Wake, and that it escaped from the Dark Place the same time Alan did. Down there, Alan had been writing a manuscript called Return to help him escape, but Mr. Scratch got hold of it and started making edits, aiming to rewrite the world into a nightmare. The clicker is the only thing that can stop him, and Alan has a manuscript page with him that puts the clicker in a trailer home in the nearby town of Watery. So Saga heads there alone to find it, leaving Alan with Alex. People in the town seem to recognize Saga, even though they've never met, and say that she lived there with her daughter, but moved away after her daughter drowned. She recalls Alan telling her that his writings will cause people's memories to change, confusing the fiction for reality. Two local entrepreneurs, Ilmo and Jaco, say hello to Saga and tell her they still have the spare keys for her old trailer here. They're locked up in a safe at the local amusement park, and they'll phone ahead for someone to get them out for her as they need to leave to run an errand. Saga suspects the clicker is in this trailer, so she heads through the woods to the amusement park. After fighting through groups of Taken in the woods and park, she finds her keys and heads to the trailer. Inside the gate of the trailer park, she comes across Tor and Odin Anderson, the old gods of Asgard. They tell Saga that Tor is her grandfather, and Odin is her great uncle, and they've been guarding her trailer for her ever since she left. They're retired and living in a nursing home now in Bright Falls and are visiting Watery with the nursing home tour bus. Saga doesn't know them, so suspects this is more fiction being written into reality. Inside the trailer, Saga finds evidence that leads her to suspect Tor, Odin, Bright Falls deputies Mulligan and Thornton, and even Ilmo and Jaco have ties to this cult of the tree they're investigating. Their hideout is in the workshop near the amusement park, and as Saga explores through it, she finds Mulligan and Thornton in the basement with the clicker. They're clearly taken by the darkness. As she approaches them, they vanish, just like Nightingale did at the morgue, and Saga finds a page detailing another overlap nearby, and a ritual to open it. Saga again follows the instructions, completes this new ritual, and enters the overlap. She hears Logan's panicked voice again, talks some more with Alan in the dark place, and kills Mulligan and Thornton, retrieving the clicker and exiting the overlap. Saga heads back to Bright Falls to give Alan the clicker, but while she is on the way, Alan and Alex are attacked in the hotel by members of the Cult of the Tree. Alan senses that Mr. Scratch is near as well. They both run off into the woods, fighting off the cultists and Taken. Alex is nowhere in sight, and Alan has another flash of pain, sensing Mr. Scratch again. Just as the cultist slashes to stab Alan in the heart, Saga arrives and shoots the knife, revealing the cultist to be Ilmo, while a helicopter flies in overhead and lands nearby. With shouts to stand down by order of the FBC, and Agent Estevez and her team take Alan and the cultists away, as well as taking over the murder case from Saga and Alex. Saga hands over her evidence, except the clicker. Alan resumes his recollection of his time in the Dark Place, trying a second attempt at writing Initiation. The Dark Place, though, has influence over his attempts, and this time his interview with Mr. Dorr plays out as a musical number, where they all perform a song that details Alan's story so far as Alan fights through waves of Taken. It's pretty damn epic. Alan leaves the studio again, and the same phone rings with the same voice. It tells Alan to meet him at the Ocean View Hotel nearby. Yes, that's hotel in this case, not motel like it was in Control. Reaching the caller's room, Alan finds out the caller is Thomas Zane, who describes himself here as a Finnish auteur filmmaker. Zane tells Alan that the two of them wrote Return together here in the hotel on a crazy booze and drug bender. Alan doesn't buy the BS and demands to know where the next murder scene is so Alan can continue with his escape. Zane says there's one in the hotel downstairs, so Alan takes his light and tries again to use his lamp and writing to manipulate the hallways to find the ritual site. On his way through, Alan finds Tim Breaker. He doesn't recall how long he's been in the Dark Place for, but he remembers being pulled here, and he suspects it was done by Warland Dorr, whom he's been trying to track down ever since. Alan carries on, and the Dark Presence is summoned yet again, and Alan escapes, talking again to Saga through the void from his side, before returning to his apartment in Parliament Tower. Alan finds more video diaries from Alice, about how after Alan went missing, she didn't leave the apartment for months. She did, however, forge a friendship with Barry Wheeler, who spent time caring for her before he moved to LA. She eventually gained her independence back, and even began fighting to overcome her fear of the dark, by exposing herself to it through her photography, culminating in this Dark Place gallery. Alan returns to his writing room and finds the full manuscript of Return on the desk. It was written by Mr. Scratch, and details how he'll escape from the Dark Place to turn the world into an eternal nightmare. Alan sits down to begin editing the story to his own ends, adding Saga to the story as the hero after having met her briefly in the overlaps. Saga is back in Bright Falls, and decides to go to Valhalla Nursing Home to speak with Tor and Odin again. She is greeted at the door by Rose Marigold, the waitress from the Oh Dear Diner, who also works here, apparently. She hesitates to let Saga in to see Odin and Tor, though, giving feeble excuses for why she can't, but she does let her in to visit with the other residents of the home. Ati, Pat Main, and Cynthia Weaver are also residents there, but their presence, being fictional or reality, is unknown. Saga finds Odin in his room, hungover from the moonshine binge with Tor and Watery the previous day. Saga uses her mind place to profile Odin, but unlike all the others she's done this with, Odin is aware it is happening and is aware and present in her mind. Odin warns Saga about Cynthia Weaver. He believes she is recently taken and is trying to turn Tor to the darkness as well. They talk more and Saga gets more convinced that their familial connection is not part of the fiction, admitting that her mother never talked about her own parents when she was younger. Tor isn't in his room, and Odin suspects the Welcome Center building adjacent to the home, but warns to watch out for Cynthia. Saga enters the Welcome Center, and it is dark and spooky, like everything else in this town. Passing through the building, Saga sees security footage of Tor, clearly enthralled by Cynthia, and Saga suspects there is another overlap nearby. Exiting the Welcome Center, she sees Tor waist-deep in the pond behind the home, and it's glowing red. Rose is on the opposite shore, yelling at him to get out of the water as it's unsafe, and yelling at an unseen Cynthia Weaver to stop this. Tor vanishes into the pond, and Saga suspects Cynthia has him trapped in the overlap. She talks to Rose, who denies seeing anything at all, and Saga profiles her and determines she's waiting for Alan's story to come true. Saga reveals that Alan has returned, and Rose brightens up and states that Saga must be the hero of the story. She finally lets down her guard and informs Saga that Cynthia must be taken, and she has Tor down in the overlap. Rose is also the one that has been leaving the lunchbox stashes of supplies around to help. Saga then sets off to set up the ritual for accessing this overlap, finding a record that Tor made, which is a song he wrote to apologize to Saga's mother for being such an awful father to her. Saga plays the record and enters the overlap in the pond. Once again, she hears Logan calling for help, talks to Alan in the dark place, notably with better reception, kills Cynthia Weaver, and rescues Tor before he is taken, pulling them both out of the overlap. At the side of the pond, Saga has a long talk with Tor and comes to accept and believe that he really is her grandfather. She learns that her mind place ability isn't unique to her, but is present in all the Anderson bloodline, which is why Odin and Tor are able to speak to her through it. But Saga's mother was afraid of this power, and hid it and any information about Tor and Odin from Saga, explaining her mind place away as imagination. With Alan's fiction growing stronger, Saga fears that the fiction of Logan drowning in Watery will come true, and resolves to get Alan to change the story. Tor explains that she can make that happen with the clicker. The way it works is, Alan writes his story, the dark place pulls it into reality, and the clicker makes the change permanent. Saga heads to the sheriff's station to give the clicker over to Alan, but when she arrives, the power is out and the place is in disarray. Agent Estevez is in a closet nearby, hiding from a Taken, which Saga eliminates. Estevez explains that the FBC considers Alan a para-utilitarian, and Alex is still alive after the attack on the hotel, but he has been touched by the darkness in a strange way. Not taken, but not back to normal either. Ilmo and Yako are also in the holding cell area. Saga gets the power back on, checks in with Alex, who seems fine, and approaches the holding cells. Ilmo and Yako begin insulting Saga, and explaining that they have it all wrong, hurling obscenities at Alan in the neighboring cell as well. Ilmo and Yako are revealed as the leaders and founders of the Cult of the Tree, and Saga walks over to Wake to hand him the clicker. Just before she does, Ilmo yells out to stop, she's making a mistake, just as Alan reveals himself to be Mr. Scratch, and he has been all along. Saga holds onto the clicker as Scratch kills Yako, and then attacks her. Saga uses the FBC containment equipment to fight him off. Weakening him, Scratch whispers before vanishing in front of her. Saga pauses to take everything in. That Alan that washed up on the beach after Nightingale was never Alan, it was Scratch all along, which means Alan is still in the dark place. Saga talks with Tor in the mind place and comes up with a plan to use the clicker to pull Alan out of the dark place, and then to get him to change return to save her daughter. Speaking with Ilmo again, Saga learns their true intent. Combined with the knowledge that this Alan was Scratch all along, the Cult of the Tree had never murdered anyone. They formed to protect Bright Falls and Watery from the evil of Cauldron Lake. One night on a patrol, they found the clicker on the shore of the lake, and so they took it as a tool. They didn't murder Nightingale that night, he was already taken. The ritual to cut him open and remove their hearts was mimicking what Alan did to Barbara Jagger. They cut Taken's hearts out, put the clicker in the hole, and click it to kill them. They called themselves a cult to instill fear of being in the woods alone, to save people from Taken by making them avoid the woods. The reason they hate Alan is because all this started after he came to Bright Falls, and they keep finding manuscript pages on the shore of the lake describing new horrors that take place. It was just an unfortunate thing that Mulligan and Thornton were taken too, not planned. Saga calls Tor with her plan to get Alan out. She needs the old gods of Asgard to write and perform one final song, a song about Alan escaping the dark place, and she'll make it reality with the clicker. She tells Alex and Estevez, and they're also on board. They'll operate the containment equipment to hold back the Taken and capture Scratch. They all head off to meet on the shore of Cauldron Lake. With the FBC equipment all set up and Tor and Odin's stage prepared on the roof of their tour bus, Saga signals everyone to start. Wave after wave of Taken emerge onto the shoreline around the bus as the sound of the old gods of Asgard rocks and pounds over the waters of the lake. Saga, Alex, and Estevez fight them back until finally the song comes to a close and Saga hits the clicker. But nothing changes. Alan doesn't come. Back in the dark place, Alan is once again in the TV studio, but this time there is no interview. Mr. Dorr drops the facade and talks to him one-to-one. Mr. Dorr claims he is here to help Alan, but is also angry with him for opening so many doors and peeking through. He suspects Alan will escape this time around the loop and says that when they meet again, it will be under different circumstances and that Alan must be sure to play his part. Alan seeks out Zane to find the last murder site and holds him at gunpoint. Zane reminds Alan about how, after all the failed attempts to escape, he had chosen to stop writing, so Zane had to work on his own, until Mr. Scratch showed up and wrote with him. They wrote Return together, and Scratch promised to use it to help Zane escape, but ultimately betrayed him and left the dark place alone, leaving Zane here. Zane tells Alan the final murder site is in his cinema nearby, but something happens during the conversation that panics Alan and he shoots Zane in the head. Alan teleports out of the room and sees a video of Zane. He laughs, wipes the blood away, and gets up and walks off. Who is this guy really, and what is going on with him? Alan heads to the cinema and works through the ritual again, encountering Tim Breaker, talking to Saga, using the plot board to work his way to the murder site, and then making his way back to Parliament Tower to his study. On the way to the tower, Alan hears the payphone ringing again and answers, expecting Zane, but it's his own voice from the future. Current Alan asks future Alan if he ever gets out.
Yes, you will. And no, you won't. And that is by your own choice.
He instructs Alan to find Alice's photos and place them in the shoebox in the plaza. Then future Alan apologizes for what he's about to go through. Alan heads up to the apartment and finds a video diary from Alice. She confesses that the nightly visits by Mr. Scratch for the last 6 years have finally worn her down. She can't handle it and came to a decision. Stop being the artist, become the art. The video ends by stating that Alice Wake took her own life shortly after finishing her Dark Place exhibit. Alan is enraged by this, enraged at Scratch, and he enters the study in the apartment where he sees Scratch at the desk, frantically scratching out text in the manuscript to make changes. Alan shoots him in the head. Suddenly, he pauses. He has a memory of this moment, but from the other side. He was at the table making the edits when Scratch came in, just like he did, and shot him, restarting the loop. It all comes together in horrific clarity. He's been the one killing himself. He wrote Return. He's been making the edits and then stopping himself from being able to finish them. He's been the one coming into the apartment as the cameras flash every night. He's been the one tormenting Alice. He is and has always been Mr. Scratch. He killed his wife. Saga stands on the beach, thinking things through, coming to a realization. When the song completed and she hit the clicker, it did bring Alan back, but not here and now. Back when they first found him on the shore after Nightingale. She realizes that Alan and Mr. Scratch are one and the same, or rather, Mr. Scratch is what Alan is called when the dark presence is within him. Literally, speaking of the devil, Mr. Scratch arrives at the beach and attacks, and with the help of Alex and Estevez, Saga lures Scratch into the containment box and activates it. The ceiling of the containment box explodes apart as the dark presence flies out of Alan, knocking everyone to the ground. Saga asks Alan if he's really him, but he looks up and responds only with "I'm sorry." Saga reaches over to grab the clicker nearby, but a foot steps on her arm to stop her, as the person bends down to take the clicker. It's Alex Casey, but he's consumed by the dark presence, and he now has the clicker. Alex picks up Saga and throws her into Cauldron Lake, The scene fades over to Bright Falls, where Pat Maine announces on the radio that Deerfest is cancelled, just as Scratch hits the button on the clicker, turning everything to black. Alan stands up, taking his first free steps out of the dark place. Things just as they were 13 years ago. Bright Falls, dark presence free, gun and flashlight in hand, Alice gone. Odin and Tor are in the lake, wading deeper into the water. They tell Alan they're heading into the dark place to find and help Saga, and that Alan should stay out here and do what he can on this side. Estevez provides Alan with more weaponry and states that nothing has escaped a containment cell like that ever, but the darkness just did. Alan takes Saga's car and drives to Bright Falls, where he sees a distortion in the street being caused by the dark presence. He steps inside it and emerges in a beautiful sunny day in Bright Falls, with Deerfest being celebrated all around him. Everybody in the crowd is wearing deer masks and obsessing over Alan's latest book, Return. This is the egotistical nightmare ending that Mr. Scratch wanted, it seems. Alan finds a copy of the book so he can read this ending and make edits to changing it. The townsfolk chase him down and Alan runs to the Valhalla nursing home. There is a writer's room in the attic, which is where he will be able to rewrite the ending. Alan sits down at the typewriter as the camera pans down to Saga in the dark place. She is in her mind place, but it's wrong. She can't leave it. She is fighting in her mind with her self-doubt and recrimination, finding evidence after evidence of her failures and mistakes, the dark place trying to trick and trap her in her own subconscious. But Saga resists, and reveals other truths, truths that empower her and fight back the doubts and despair. With this confidence, she is able to leave the mind place and emerges on the streets of Dark Place, New York. She hears the same payphone ringing, and answers to hear an unknown female voice. It tells her she needs to look in the shoebox in Parliament Plaza. Saga also runs into Sheriff Breaker. He talks to her about Warland Door, and how the manuscript page he was going to show her all the way back in the morgue was about him. He still has it, and hands it to her, suspecting that Mr. Door brought him here to prevent Saga from reading it. The page describes Mr. Door's ability to manipulate the dark place, to will pathways into existence as needed. Saga follows the directions on the page and finds herself in the plaza and goes to the shoebox. Inside it is the clicker and a single bullet made of light. The phone rings again, and the same female voice tells Saga to help Alan find the ending. Saga talks to Alan through the mind place and they discuss how to end the story. She returns to the fountain that she entered the dark place through and goes in, emerging in the writer's room with Alan. He's finished writing the ending, and Saga has the clicker and the bullet. They look at each other and agree that this is how it must be, just as the dark presence, Scratch, Alex Casey, walks in the door to face them. Saga hits the button on the clicker, and the dark presence flies out of Alex as Alan screams to come and get him. The dark presence flies back into Alan, who looks over at Saga just as she fires the bullet of light into his head. Alan Wake is dead. The ultimate sacrifice needed to justify the happy ending they were hoping for. Alan was willing to pay that price to right all the wrongs. Alex stands up in the background and asks Saga if it's over, as Saga silently pulls out her phone to call Logan and see if she's alive. The phone rings, 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 as the credits roll. Suddenly, a video diary from Alice begins. She explains that when she went to the FBC to interview about the hauntings, something happened there, and when she returned home, she remembered everything. About being trapped in the dark place, about Alan diving in to take her place just as she emerged from the lake. She knew that the hauntings were projections of Alan, trying to reach her, to escape. She never killed herself. She went back to Cauldron Lake and into the dark place to find Alan. Her diaries were purposefully deceptive, to help guide him to a change. That destruction or ascension are the only ways to escape the dark place, and that after all the loops of destruction, their ascension was coming, finishing by smiling at the camera and saying,
Alan, I think we're getting close.
Alan wakes up in his chair in the writing room, the bullet hole in his head gone once again. But a look of realization covers his face as he states,
It's not a loop. It's a spiral.
"Oh my god, how good was this game, right? I absolutely loved it, and I hope you all did as well. For For those of you here at the end that made it all the way through, I say to you specially, please go and play this game for yourself. There's so much more to it that I can't possibly convey in a summary, and I truly feel that games like this are a must-play experience. I'll be back very soon with even more Alan Wake 2 content discussing lore and whatever else I can find and creative takes I can spin it with. Thank you all so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed it. Consider a like and subscribe, and leave a comment below with your thoughts on the story, theories, and desires for Alan Wake 3, or just to say hello. I appreciate them all. Cheers everyone, I'll see you in the next video, and as always my friends, be legendary.